Contrast Security secures the code that global business relies on. It is the industry's most modern and comprehensive code security platform, removing security roadblock inefficiencies and empowering enterprise developers to write and release secure application code faster. The Contrast platform automatically detects vulnerabilities while developers write code, eliminates false positives, and provides how-to-fix guidance for easy and fast vulnerability remediation. Learn more about the Contrast platform at securityweekly.com/contrast security. The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. Businesses need API protection that goes beyond signature matching and can stay ahead of attackers and their various tactics and tools. They need a solution that is more patient and prepared than a modern attacker and can track their actions over time. ThreatX is the only API attack protection platform that delivers on the promise of stopping API attacks in real time while giving you the visibility you need to prepare for future attacks. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatX. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Kieran Comedy from DeepFactor about improving security culture and observability in containers and clouds. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella and Joe South, and it's just about time for the news. But first, don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, the Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. And don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Joe, you might have, I'm not sure if you got to listen to our talk with Kieran, but we have a new term now. We're doing shift left left, which I'm hoping we eventually get to some, security cheat codes like shift up up down down left right BA, and then all of our work is done. So here's to a future where we don't need any more appsec.
Do we need more vocabulary to learn, like more key terms?
We do have
farther left.
Speaking of some key terms of vocabulary to learn, we do have a Kinsella rating scale that we're developing for vulnerabilities. Man. So let's exercise some of that as we talk about some flaws. I got a big one here that I think you'll also enjoy, John. Wiz.io. We covered their extra replica attack last April. That was in episode 195. Go back and listen if you haven't done that already. But for those of you who have, or have come back after catching up on episode 195, they released their technical details behind the PostgreSQL flaw that they found. And what was really neat about this is that the flaw was not just in Azure, it was in Google, and it was fundamentally something that could be a problem in any cloud service provider or any environment where a organization is trying to adapt legacy code. Here, legacy is something like a 25-year-old project like PostgreSQL that wasn't built with multi-tenancy capabilities in mind or with granular access controls and a lot of its admin capabilities. So this is where CSPs now need to go back and figure out, what should we do? We need to create some, I love this new term, semi-super users. Do we do this through some forking some code? Do we do this through some extra configuration, through some customized hardening? So there's a lot of interesting angles to take on this, but I'm curious, John, I know we chatted about extra replica a while ago. If there was, let's start with your reaction to seeing what this was.
Well, first, I can't believe that was just episode 195 because that feels like it was at least a year ago when we were talking about this. Yeah, I thought this was interesting from a few points of view. But so at the core, I mean, the first thought was, if we think about Amazon, they've forked one or two open source packages, and the half the world, it feels like half the world has been sort of gnashing their teeth at them over that. But the reason I'm mentioning that here is, think about it. It's, you've got this package which has been in development and in heavy use for 20, 25 years. You have to know that thing so well to be able to run that as a service or provide that at scale, right? So how, I mean, if I was sitting over at any of these providers and someone said, you need to secure this, I'm going to go and try and get my recruiters to find some of the core developers and say, you're working for us. I'm going to pay you a ton of money. And so that's way one. Way two would be, and I think this is what they should do, that at least the three big providers should be, and maybe they are doing this. I haven't looked, so I don't know. If they really need to step up and go out to these open source projects and say, hey, we want to help make this thing become something which is going to be very easy to use in a secure manner by a provider or in a multi-tenant environment. Let me say it that way. Because that's really what's needed here, right? It's as Wiz says in the article, it's like there's not really a lot of permission, not really granular permission set in there. It's sort of a bit of a shrug. It's a database, right? Hey, who's got multi-tenanted database? Oh, I got an idea. So I think there's a few different aspects to it. And yeah, right. It's. I think so. That's sort of the core at the high level. It's like, when you. Yes, I know databases pretty well. I know indexes. I know a lot of these things. I'd never heard of index functions, or at least don't think I had. So like, this is one of the ways that they found to be able to iterate down and execute code by, like, but you can put an index function. You can create a function, have it be used by the database to generate the what your hashes for your index looks like, and then they figure out with that code they're able to actually go and call Unix commands, and that's how it's one of their breakthroughs. So hey, you got to know your stuff backwards and forward to know that one. But the second part of that is, it seems like the underlying system still wasn't hardened as much as it could have been. I can't even remember which provider that is, so I'm not casting stones. But yeah, so it's there's a few different aspects here. I think it's really interesting. It'll be curious to see where else we get issues like this, of this scale or of this complexity over the next 2-3 years. I think the databases are some more complex things. Machine learning will probably be interesting. How these guys try to bring that in, and that might be there, as we've discussed in recent episodes. That problem might already be there. We just haven't actually stumbled upon it yet, unfortunately. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
It could very well be. And to support your point too, that alter, they did a privileged escalation through the alter table using the index function. And they even note in the article that behavior of that index function was not in any documentation. It was but is referenced in the source code. So very much you do need to have someone who's intimately familiar with, oh, this capability exists. This is how it exists. And look, we even wrote it if you read the source code. So Joe, I don't know how much of, if you finished reading the Postgres, I'm never going to say this, the database's source code. Before today, but what stood out for you on this particular article?
Yeah, for me, it kind of sounded like the cloud providers potentially just lifted and shifted, Postgres into their environment and then started to try to just provide it to their customers, with maybe some rudimentary segmentation going on. I would fully expect that after this happens, those cloud providers should be going out there and poaching these developers, from Postgres and just paying them basically whatever they want, and getting this done. But, this also begs to question the other open source projects that might be in the cloud provider and what the process was for those, because a lot of the times, as we're finding, when you're going into the cloud, you really have to, a lot of the times, redesign your product. And, because the archaic or legacy format of doing things doesn't translate directly into the cloud. Even in traditional lift and shifts that the cloud was starting, to have in the beginning of the cloud, it still required some code refactoring and whatnot. So I really wonder what else is out there that we haven't uncovered yet, that are open source projects.
Yeah, and that's what's neat about this Wiz research. It really highlights that new, call it a new attack surface or a new type of threat model in the sense of how are uh, how are organizations adding multi-tenancy capabilities to old existing code. And even the article calls out, you can do this through extensions and configurations or maintaining their own fork. For me, of those options, I would avoid forking the code and having it be just because that seems too prone to drift and maintenance chaos. But I'm sure just a quick question. Let's see. I'm going to go with extensions and configurations. Anyone want to pick up? What would you do, John and Joe? That extension and config or fork the code?
Oh no, definitely not fork. The last thing I want to do is fork a project, and as someone who's done this before, the last thing I want to do is fork a project and have my own internal version of it to try and patch and keep up to date. No, you don't do that. I mean, this is, and just the same thing I was saying around the find the core guys and pay them a nice large truck of money, but that doesn't help the community, and that's sort of where the open source part of me comes back and says, like, Amazon has a ton of people in like an actual open source community group now. So it's, I hope they're starting to think about this. I haven't talked to them for a while, but like I want this. I mean, if these guys are going to use this software, and I'm leaving the argument separate of like making money off something that the community's developed, but like contribute back. I mean, it's not so much being scared of, if we contribute, then Google gets to use our stuff for free, or Microsoft, or Joe Bob's Cloud, whatever. But the idea of a trademark on that, the idea that everyone should be sort of, throw some brain in at this thing, and like, there's obviously a lot of work there to be done. Postgres isn't going away, man. I mean, there's at least 2 or 3 other startups now that are like, have significant amount of work that they put into doing some really interesting things on top of the Postgres engine. So this is definitely an investment, not just sort of something for a short time.
It is. And I'm going to have to reach out to the Wiz folks and see if we can get We Are Semi-Super Users onto a t-shirt slogan. Maybe we can do some revenue sharing with ASW, just because I love that phrase from the article. But we do have a whole bunch of other articles we got to hit. I'm going to use this chance to segue, because we're talking about adding multi-tenancy, improving, hardening legacy code. And here, talk about legacy just because it's been used for years. There is from the open save our software, sos.dev. So here is an award program that is actually focused rather on paying bounties to find bugs, to actually pay bounties to fix bugs. And actually sos.dev gives a little bit more clarity on if you do something to improve the scorecard value from the OSSF scorecard for a repo, you'll get an award. If you do something more complex, you can get an award. And you go everywhere from $500 to $10,000 or more by improving, hardening the code within an open source project, which I thought was really awesome. Yeah. And I think one of the other comments I will make, though, is that we're still in the world of this type of award programs. We are awarding based on impact of what's done, or the impact of a bug, if you will, as opposed to necessarily the effort involved to implement that. So there's still a nuance there that we're not necessarily that we're focused on value rather than effort. But for those of you out there who want to help fix the fix code rather than just find the bugs, here's a way to make money off it. So I don't know if how much this appeals to you, Joe, if you're going to dive into this, or if this ties into some of the, if you have a list of open source projects that you'd throw on to that you'd love to see these money be spent on.
I probably won't dive into it myself. Not quite my skill set, but I find it really interesting that this hasn't been out there before, because it really makes a lot of sense, for this to exist, for people to, really be looking at open source projects and not just finding vulnerabilities, but the other side of the coin, right? Like, it doesn't mean that much for companies if you were to flip it to the company side of paying a company to fix their vulnerability. That's really counterintuitive. But on the open source community, that's kind of a reverse bug bounty program. I like the idea.
Yeah, and it's good to see. It's good to see that type of innovation and more incentives be focused on. Let's just have secure software by default. And one of the other things that I discovered from this, I knew about the OSSF scorecard tool, but I didn't know about their All-Star tool as well, which is just a way to set and review security policies on GitHub. So if you have repos on GitHub, there's a bunch of open source tools that can benefit everyone. And shout out, if you're using this in your internal enterprise, throw some money back to the community to help either subsidize some of these award programs or subsidize some of the development. Be a good community member. Speaking, John, I'm going to try. We have a whole bunch of articles to get through, and you mentioned people with truckloads of cash. There is a person that we have an article about who doesn't have truckloads, but does have Ferraris full of cash.
Yes.
John Carmack had an interview that you highlighted that also came across my radar about programming setups and IDEs. Well, we're going to get into some more security bugs in a moment, but this is about debugging. So why did this speak to you?
Yes, good callback on the Ferraris. Him and his turbocharged Ferrari days. So for folks who don't know, John Carmack, the interviewer in this link, not me. Anyway, I'll keep going. Considers this guy to be one of the best developers in the world. And John's good. I'm not knocking against that or any other, but he is sort of he's a pretty huge name, at least to some of us. He's been around for quite a while. He's a guy who developed Doom, Quake, co-founded id Software. He was CTO of Oculus for a while. You get the idea. He's a pretty big brain in the industry. This interview, which I don't know if you noticed, Mike, is only a 15-minute clip of the whole interview, which is 5 hours long. I've tried watching that. It gets old. But I do want to go back and try. I think I've made it to about three and a half. And like the last hour is him talking about his latest thing, which is he thinks there's a way to solve AGI, artificial general intelligence, which I'm not too sure about, but I still want to give a listen and see what he says. Anyways, for this 15-minute clip, which is much more consumable for our listeners, the question in the title of this sounds sort of, it doesn't really do justice. It says, hey, what's the best programming setup on an IDE? What do you use? He kept trying to ask him this question of like, how do you code, dude? But in this clip, Carmack came back and he was talking about his experience. I think it must be talking about Facebook. He's talking about the large tech companies with boatloads of cash and how the developers their code. And at least from his experience, which I find a little hard to believe. So, for folks who are at these companies, let us know on Discord or Twitter. But from his experience, he's saying that there is a resistance to modern development practices. So a lot of people using VI and Emacs and not using debuggers. And where he was sort of comparing it from, he's like, look, like when I've written games over the last 20, 30 years, often before I do a full build of the software and do a release for QA testing or just to play with, I'll actually run the code through a debugger to see if it's doing what I want it to do. And he finds that both sort of helps him understand the code and find errors earlier, but he felt there was a resistance to even using a debugger at some of the larger firms. So I think that's a limited experience, maybe depending on which teams he was working with. I'm sure some of these groups will know. I mean, you've got look at between VS Code and Visual Studio over on Microsoft, you've got just amazing tools. So people have to be using them. But it was interesting to sort of hear from his point of view of like sort of this is why, not just sort of like, I might be flattening it a little bit, so correct me if I'm wrong, but not just purely like, oh, they're not using the tools, but like sort of the thought process behind why he likes using them and what it gets out of them. I thought it was good little thing to listen to.
Yeah, it was interesting because it spoke to me too a little bit of that aspect that we generally talk about are tools serving the end users? Are they how consumable are they? Because you can have the best, greatest debugger in the world, but if printf works, printf works.
Yep.
I've used that ages and ages of times before I
Still do.
decided like, oh yeah, I'll go. Yeah, exactly.
Damn it, I'm caught.
Before play with GDB, and what does this register hold, and let's dereference this pointer, this address, and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I would say that to a degree, printf can work, except for it can also hide race conditions, though. So there are nuances, there are subtleties that can happen where your debugging technique can actually work against you. And it becomes just an awareness of, well, maybe I do need the IDE, or I need it to be just more helpful for me, broadly speaking, rather than the rare moments. Because I think Carmack was saying, in his experience, he wasn't seeing developers dive into the debugger until they were having really gnarly problems they had to analyze. But one other thought there I would say too is that both Go and Rust, modern languages, and Rust in particular, has had a really good developer survey and good feedback about their error messages. And I think this we're seeing not only in the IDE, but in the languages themselves, a distinct improvement over the C++ template errors that are inscrutable pages and pages of Rosetta Stone versus something that's more friendly and readable that you get back from something like Rust when there are compiler errors. So the arc of the future is towards something that's supported, that's going beyond just Vim, Emacs, kind of who cares? I shrug and use what you want to write, but debug in the way that works for you. So, John, I don't know, or Joe, if you've got some programming background as well, that you have any preferences for printf or something better in your debugging experience.
Not a good one, but I am always criticized when I use Vim instead of any of the more mature text readers or text editors.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've gone beyond the Vim versus Emacs is can be fun, I think, but it's sort of one of those. I don't know. I get bored with it. Who cares what you use? You're writing code, and there's plenty of other text editors out there. Especially because VS Code, I will say, as a brief aside, there are a bunch of synthwave color patterns you can set up in your VS Code environment, and for that reason alone, use VS Code. So no. Sorry, John, we're going to switch now so that you can't interrupt me and say no anymore to some actual articles about vulnerabilities. But since you were saying no, how about we get you to say yes about malware encoded in a string of emojis?
Yes. So this is a Candy article, but still it's a fun one. I think we've probably talked about this a little bit in the past, but the general thought here is to sort of take a step back. Frequently malware and payloads they're not going to be using a standard pleasant ASCII upper lowercase and numerics, right? It's not that sort of alphanumeric character set that lends itself to malware, because malware is actually a program, right? It's some sort of binary. But once you start extending that character set and allowing, both higher values and multi-byte values, now you've got something that, the kids can play with, so to speak. So this article over at Vice, where they're linking something from someone else, DEF CON, of course, someone put together a malware which is based off of a series of emojis. So this is, again, right, this requires improper input validation and sanitization and all those things which we're always stressing about. And they say that in the articles, like, look, this exists, this is possible, but still basically there has to be a vulnerability that we can get this into an application to actually run this or have it rendered in the appropriate way. So something to look out for, something to give a bit of a giggle, but at least I personally wouldn't worry too much about it quite yet.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those areas of let's have fun with UTF-8. Let's have fun with just byte strings to see how they can be misused, abused, or creatively adapted. And to me, it speaks to, as you pointed out, it's predicated there must be an initial attack vector first, but it's still fun to understand and learn nuances because historically, font handling has been an area rife with vulnerabilities because often it's handled in kernel space, especially on the Windows side, even on Mac OS. So as we see more and more applications also support emojis, that would be cool to see what might happen there, as well as being able to just understand how it could be abused with some byte strings. Much more entertaining than NOP sleds. So let's see, what else do we have? I think I've got another, speaking of DEF CON and Black Hat, there is another article about abusing source code management systems. This was also a Black Hat presentation that was more focused about on the theme, I'll say, of threat modeling and attack surfaces, in the sense of just knowing if you're using GitHub, GitLab, Git, Subversion, for those of you still out there using that poor, dusty, and neglected source code management system.
Talking to you,
just
Apache.
showing different ways that attackers might gain and maintain persistence on these areas. So I don't know that we necessarily need a deep dive onto this particular article, other than to say, if you are doing, hardening your CI/CD pipeline, it's a good reference for making sure your threat model is comprehensive, and make sure you have MFA deployed for all of your developers and admins, preferably using FIDO's 2 security keys. So that was my quick run through there. I don't know if there's something else that either of you guys wanted to add on that one, or if we should pick another article.
Yeah. Would shifting left sum up this article?
Yeah. Yeah, this is definitely a shift left, right, up, down. Yes. Well, good call. We're going to have to keep thinking of that one. So as we're talking about, let's see, what's a good setup to do? You had a good candy category, I'm going to have to say, John. We'll have to start decorating our articles with that. String of emojis, but 2 different passwords that can unlock a zip file. Here's a case of surprise, but kind of cool because it touches a little bit on cryptography.
Surprise. Which tab is it? I don't need the tab. I know the article. So yeah, this started off well. I think it. Oh, hey, the tabs aren't in front of me. Funny how that works. This was, I think, the basis for this came from a tweet, and then some folks over at a Bleeping Computer, which seemed to be hitting my radar a lot this week, turned into an article. So what's going on in a nutshell is somebody out there said, "Hey, I've got the zip file, and I can use this long phrase." If I remember right, he was using like the Rickroll lyrics. Yep. Yeah. So he's basically got this long password, which is, I think, the key here being over 64 bytes. And he's like, okay, here's one way you can unzip this password protected zipped file is using this big long phrase, but you can also decrypt it with the second password. Haha, look, I'm cool. I found this neat trick. And what's going on, it turns out, and this actually worked across more than one zip program. So it's not specific to a single zip program. It's part of the algorithm, is my understanding. But what's going on is, with part of that algorithm is if your password is greater than 64 bytes, instead of using the password to do the encryption on the zip file, it actually hashes that password and then uses the hash. So the second value he had was just the hash itself that he was putting in. So you can either decrypt the zip file with the password or with the hash. So the reason, beside the candy, the reason it was interesting to me is, like, if you wanted to fix this, how would you go about doing that fix? So would you have your input validator for that password actually try and figure out if it's a hash or not? Or how do you, I mean, maybe you add an out flag saying, hey, we're using a hash, not using a password. So if someone puts a hash in, then you don't use it. Or I don't know, it'd be interesting to sort of figure out how do you actually fix this?
I hadn't thought of that. I had been thinking of different attack scenarios for password endpoints, because especially using bcrypt, for example, or PBF, those password-based derivation functions. They're designed to be high work factors. So if you submitted, say, hey, my password just happens to be a 2 gigabyte password, you could actually, that's an algorithmic DOS. You could potentially burn some CPU if the endpoint's just going to accept that and try to hash that eventually. So there's a couple fun things there. Also, if there's a lot of seen on Twitter, don't have any good examples off the top of my head, but people poking around and saying, here's my 40 character password, but it's only taking 12 characters. It's only taking the first 24 characters of it, or it's taking some limited amount, because some of the hashing functions by design do have upper limits of what they take in. And so it's more of just understanding and kind of teasing out what's going on behind the scenes here. So I'm going to take this from the other ways to attack these password endpoints rather than how to fix it. So we'll leave the how to fix it over Joe if you have any ideas on that.
This is a tough one, honestly, because like it's a problem with the algorithm that is open source. So I guess it could tie back to the other one, right, where you're fixing bugs in open source projects to resolve, vulnerabilities and whatnot, right? But I feel like this is a big issue that should be seen in more places than just zip files. I mean, obviously, depending on where it's used, but I'm kind of surprised that this hasn't been discovered before.
Yes, would definitely be curious. And I guess password-based, password-protected zip files, password-protected PDFs, I think those are few and far between, perhaps. There are better ways. I was about to say there are better ways to encrypt these things, such as using GPG, but I might have just defeated my own argument by saying GPG, even though in spirit, I hope that's actually correct, if not in usability. But we've got a quick run through a bunch of other articles on bugs. A real quick one about Xiaomi phone bug, loud payment forgery. Here's another article from Checkpoint Research, actually, looking into what to me was kind of interesting, that here was an example of a trusted execution environment on the phone, so on the hardware side. Android is supposed to play nice with the security world, and the security world, which is this execution environment, is supposed to have a strict boundary with the normal world. But what was really interesting was, let's see if I can get the fun quote, is that the developers chose their own format, which, however, had a flaw, an absence of version control. So, of course, you have these signed packages. The trusted execution environment says, yep, this is signed, I will execute it, blah, blah, blah. But if you don't have a version control in there, you could say, well, let me roll back to this old version of this application that was signed, that has a known vulnerability in it. And so we'll just take advantage of the known exploit that is in version 1.x, for example, rather than being forced to use this version of 1.y or the latest version. So I just thought that was pretty interesting in the sense of a very, not even necessarily subtle, a very simple omission, that why not sign and version control your software that you're sending out there? So quick take-home message, and I think nothing other too exciting other than at the very end, and I don't know if this is marketing or not, but supposedly the first time that these trusted applications have been reviewed for security issues. So I'm sure that that may not be true. Maybe this hasn't been publicly discussed, but for those bug bounty researchers out there, possibly some trusted applications to go dive into and get some bounty awards for. Speaking of bounty, as I'm trying to roll through real quick, John, you had another article about Google patching yet another 0-day for this year.
Yeah, we can hit this one just quickly. It's because I think, oh man, one of my little hobbies I'm working on right now is trying to come up. We talked about this sometime last year, but I'm trying to come up with better spreadsheets or better collections of data for where vulnerabilities are found, what they're found in, sort of, so we can get a sense of, are we seeing patterns around time, things like that. But in this sort of example of that, 5.0 days in Chrome by itself doesn't really, okay, well, how many did the other guys have? But this one in particular was, I had the phrase highlighted. It has to do with input validation on their intents, which it's sort of not quite, but sort of their plugin framework to allow you to take a URL and have that turned into execute something on the system. So there's something in there that it's not being validated correctly. So in theory, you could run something on the system if someone clicks on this link. Not good. The Kinsella scale. Yeah, that's really all we need on this one, right? We had this one this week. We've got, I don't think we even mentioned the one, did we, from Apple, which came out last Monday. So it's I'm not bashing on them for having 5. It's just another one.
Yes, it's just stay up to date, stay patched. And I think because these types of things lead to breaches. And I had 3 articles around breaches that I'm going to try to just wrap up real quick. That one of them, of course, so one of the t-shirts we're going to start selling is We Are Semi-Super Users. The other one is a new take on a new version of We Take Security Seriously. So DigitalOcean says, we have a responsibility we approach with utmost dedication. So utmost dedication, or is going to work that into our second t-shirt slogan. So stay tuned, folks. But these this DigitalOcean and the Signal breach were both examples of very targeted attacks through their third-party service providers. Signal through Twilio, DigitalOcean through MailChimp. And it was more of just kind of one of those reminders of how expansive is your threat model on your the SaaS or the B2B types of services you rely on, as well as a little bit of the angle of Signal having defense in depth in their application design, so that they, the ultimately not all users, their contacts messages wouldn't have been exposed by this re-registration attack that was done. Basically, an attacker could go and re-register a phone number on their own device and then start talking with people, which this reporter was targeted. But the other reason I brought these two together and this third was that they Signal and DigitalOcean were examples of targeted attacks. There's another funny one from ZDNet about confused cyber criminals have hacked a water company in a bizarre case of mistaken identity. So yes, you can still have targeted attacks that are mistakenly targeted. And here maybe just end on the idea of, I've heard many times, I think we even heard it last week, I don't need to outrun you, I just need to outrun the bear, which is a bit of a cliche, a bit of honestly, a tired analogy that I avoid using. And this is possibly an example why. So maybe we need to come up with a better metaphor about targeting, or what our threat models should care about the threat actors versus what could actually happen. What's the threat scenario itself rather than who's conducting that attack?
Yeah, it's... I think that's, again, file under funny haha. Someone still had their day ruined on the water side, at least. Someone still did get attacked. The DO one is interesting just from the, you read this post and you're like, yeah, they spent a lot of time in a large boardroom going over the words in this post. But I guess what's interesting to me is sorry, not AppSec, but think back a few years. It used to be really... I'll say off color to out a vendor who caused you to have an outage, right? Like it'd be like, I remember if either a cloud provider had an issue, the last thing you do is go and talk, about your network provider or something like that example. And I guess it's as we become more understanding of the supply chain, of the overall supply chain, not just software. I'm not sure if that's why we're more willing to do this now, or if it's just once it's happened enough that people are willing to just throw their partners underneath the bus. But we're seeing that more, and that's just sort of, I don't know, it's interesting. I'm not saying good or bad, but I will note it. How about that?
Well noted. And it reminds me, back in the Wiz research article, there was a great response from GCP's security team because they sent the Wiz researchers a friendly message that was, have you folks been doing research? Would you mind sharing your progress if so? Which is definitely the opposite end of the spectrum of cease and desist, stop what you're doing right now. We've notified our lawyers and law enforcement. So I just think that's kind of ties into what you were saying there at the end, John, about not necessarily, having what am I trying to approach here? The constructive attitude towards research, or taking responsibility for your failures, rather than just throwing the third-party security, third-party providers under the bus with utmost dedication. So I don't know if any final thoughts on those particular breaches, or are you going to outrun the bear? Or are you just going to outrun us, Joe?
All I gotta do is outrun the bear, but I find it funny that those hackers, accidentally targeted the wrong person. What was the response? Like, my bad. I didn't mean to hack you.
Sort of like, well, hey, here's some ransomware. Anybody can pay a ransom, just like anybody can buy a T-shirt. So let us know if you really like We Are Semi-Super Users, because that's my favorite. I'm just going to keep repeating that. But I'm also going to have to repeat once again the end of the show spiel. So I do want to thank John and Joe for joining us. I want to thank all of you for joining us as well. Please subscribe, hit that like button, and check out the show notes. And since we did touch on debugging, as I usually try to leave you with some music, the Fine Young Cannibals, they have a great song, She Drives Me Crazy. And if there was ever an anthem for debugging software, just listen to the lyrics. Everything you say is lies, but to me, there's no surprise. And just go listen to that in the background while you're walking through your Vim, Emacs, Visual Studio with the synthwave theme on. In any case, hopefully you've enjoyed our show. We'll see you next week on Application Security Weekly.